think we'll get started here. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Emily King. I'm a STAR, I work at STAR. I'm an engineering technician, and I get the pleasure of talking to you today about your favorite topic, environmental review process. So thanks for joining us, and we will get started. Just let me know if you have any questions as we go. Otherwise, we will have time for questions at the end as well. And I'll try to rattle through this as fast as possible so you can get on with your day. Starting out, why are environmental reviews required? RUS, Rural Utility Service, is required by federal law to perform an environmental review, also known as ER, on all construction projects that they are going to fund. Most of us, when we think of an ER, we think of just section 106 review when it comes to an ER. There's actually several existing federal statutes that need to be looked at with an ER, and those include, some of those include the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, section 106 that you all know about, the Endangered Species Act, and the National Environmental Protection Act, NEPA. When are environmental reviews written? ERs are written when any project or work order is part of a construction work plan, an amendment to a construction work plan, for 1600s, also known as minor projects, or special projects that receive funding from RUS, such as new headquarters. ERs can contain different types and amounts of information depending on its classification. In 7 CFR 1970, Environmental Policies and Procedures. 7 CFR 1970 is specific to USDA and is the new federal regulation for RUS when it comes to environmental reviews. This was updated in 2015. So there's a bunch of different steps that go into creating an environmental review. The first step we do when we are notified that, when STAR is notified that we're going to do an environmental review for someone, is we need to identify the classification of the project. So usually there's 2 classifications that they fall under. A .53 is made up of new builds, like code 100s, rebuilds, and changing out like for like equipment that are classified as categorically exempt without an environmental report. So basically, RUS codes that are non-site specific, examples would be like code 100s, 500s, 600s, or like a code 300 that's like for like in the same path. So replacing an overhead line with an overhead line in the same exact path. It can't change size of the road at all at any point. Otherwise it becomes a .54. So a .54, a project that qualifies as a .54 would be anytime a utility chooses to rebuild a line from overhead to underground or rebuild in a new project path. So again, at any point, changing the project path from its existing path would put it as a .54. These projects would be classified as categorically exempt with an environmental report. This also includes new line builds, which are code 200. Once you determine if it's a .53 or a .54, then you also have to determine the subclassification that needs to be identified. If your project would classify as a .53, but you are aware of a known site, like a known burial site, that the project would be going through, then it would actually be classified as a .52 extraordinary circumstance. And if it ends up being a .52, then you actually end up following the same steps that a .54 process would be. So basically, if your project would normally be a .53, you know you're gonna go through a site, you're gonna run into issues, you're gonna have to do the full-blown ER and all the consultation letters to be able to move forward with your project. And if you're unsure of what your project would classify as, just talk to your engineer and they can help. Next thing we are looking for is a project description. So when you reach out to STAR and want us to do an environmental review on a project or a work order, it's really important to make sure we have all the information that we need to get started with it. Detailed project descriptions are needed that are tailored to the environmental reviewer. What we normally request or need is a project or work order number. So for minutes and construction work plan projects, those would be your 200, like 201, 202, 300. 300 code projects would be like 301, 302, whatever the next one is in the sequence, or the work order number. We need location information so we can figure out where the project is. Examples I've gotten have been staking sheets. Staking sheets are really good to have. You just need to make sure that there is a good map showing the location. But having information such as township range, section, or like a map number or close location number. Sometimes people will do a township map or a zoomed out map showing the project location. We also like to see a zoomed in map of the project path as well. This helps with just like road names, just to make sure we're kind of in the right spot. And also zoomed in like that, make sure you're drawing in the project path on the side of the road or sides of the road that it's actually going to be on. That's really important. We actually need to specify that ahead of time. And I do understand it's kind of hard to predict that sometimes with construction work plan projects, but you do have to make a decision on the side of the road. If it changes later on and you do decide to change the project route, you would just have to amend the project later on. But it is important because if your project is on the north side of the road and it's going to go through a potential burial site or something like that, it might be that we could figure out a way to change the project path ahead of time to avoid that site. So that's something very important to include. Also, we need to know, what is the project? Is it overhead underground? Is it just new underground line? Is it going from single phase to 3-phase? Conductor type? 1/0, 4/0, distance? How many miles is the project? Those are some of the things that I need or we need to get started on getting the ER prepared. Some examples. This is an example of a project description that we would write. This one is installation of 1.20 miles of 3-phase 12.5 kV 1/0 AL underground cable. The cable will be installed at a depth of 36 to 42 inches or 8 to 15 feet when boring is used inside of the established public road right-of-way. Project path will be on the north side of County Road 43. No right-of-way clearing or material/equipment staging areas will be required. The project will be within a developed area and will not involve removing vegetation, native vegetation. So as you can see, that project description includes a lot of the key pieces that were mentioned on the last slide. Other parts of the project description that we need to identify is the method of construction. So this one, underground cable installation for the project will be by vibration/earth saw and boring. If it was overhead, obviously that description would change. Additional information that would also be adjusted to fit your project's setting would be the surrounding land type. So adjacent land use is rural, residential, and woodland for this one. It might be that it's urban or farmland. You you need to state those things. There are no managed areas or floodplains in the project area. If there were, we have to change that wording a little bit. The project was found to have no effect on historical districts and critical habitats in the project area. Another sort of summary sentence that we include in the project description part of the ER narrative. And that again can change based on the findings as we are doing our research. Step 3, we need to figure out who our consulting parties are going to be, who we need to reach out to for the ER. Projects coded as code 100 or classified as categorically exempt without an ER. .53 projects. The general rule is that no government agencies or tribal historic preservation offices, also known as TIPOs, will be sent consultation letters. Exceptions to this general rule are any project within tribal lands, or if once we get going on the ER research, we find the need for consultation. An example of this would be once we do our SHPO database search, which we do as well for like 1,600 projects, if we find that there are a bunch of known archaeological sites that you would knowingly go through if you were to move forward with this project, then we would notify you as the co-op, let you know that you're going to run into some issues here, and see if there's a different way to reroute the project path to avoid those sites. Otherwise, you would be required to send those consultation letters and move forward with the more in-depth environmental review. So there are certain situations when that occurs. Projects classified as categorically exempt with the ER, the .54 projects, those will always require consultation with multiple state and federal agencies and TIPOs. Some of the consulting parties that we need to contact are the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, USFWS, State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, Tribal Historic Preservation Office, TIPO, and Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. Step 4, once we have identified who we need to consult, we start doing the research. This is just a list of some of the stuff that the environmental review needs to cover certain areas. Section 106, historic properties and tribal consultation, threatened and endangered species, wetland protection, floodplain management, formally classified lands, water resources, coastal resources, coral reef, protected aquatic habitats, which usually is not an issue around here, but still part of it. Prime farmland, air quality, site containment and hazardous waste, and environmental justice. So the first thing I really do when I start is I send off SHPO database search. This is the first step we need to do to identify any historical or archaeological resources located within the project or work order area of potential effect, also known as APE. So that's where, like I mentioned previously, if this search resulted in identifying sites that might be an issue, sometimes co-ops will reroute their project path or decide to go a different way with it. This search is performed on all sections within 1 mile of the project path. So for projects that are larger in size, this list of sections that we have to search can get really long. What we do is we send that off to SHPO, and on the next slide you'll see 2 slides, you'll see they kind of send us back by a list of results. Area of potential effect, APE. So there's different APEs for the different types of projects. Underground distribution lines, for historic resource, they care about anything within a 50-foot radius. For archaeological resources, it's anything within a mile. So that's why we look out the full mile, because we want to capture any of those sites that could be out that far. Overhead distribution lines and substations are the same. They're not a half mile for historical resources and 1 mile for archaeological resources. So all the different types of construction, you're concerned about any archaeological resources or sites within a mile. It's the historical resources that can vary in the APE. Here is that list they send back. So when they respond, they either say there were no historical or archaeological sites nearby, or they'll attach spreadsheets. They separate out the historical sites and the archaeological sites into different spreadsheets. As you can see, it's a kind of scary looking list. Sometimes this list can be really, really long. Sometimes it might just have 1 site on it. And again, this is all sites within, or all sections within 1 mile. So sometimes some of these sites actually end up being over a mile away from the project path, just because that section goes expands on beyond the mile away from the project path. So we have to sort through the list and find out which of these identified sites actually fall within that APE. So for historical resources, again, we're searching out a mile. So oftentimes, if it's an underground project and the APE for that, if you remember, is just 50 feet, we oftentimes don't find a whole lot of historical sites that are near the project path. It oftentimes ends up being something like a building. There might be a building, like a schoolhouse or something that might be right there along the project path, or a bridge. So then our goal is, once we go through and identify which sites are actually within the APE, our goal is to justify how doing the project will still have no effect on the historic or archaeological resource. So by boring around the site or under the site, we have to justify why that won't have an effect. Or maybe you're going on the opposite side of the road from the site. So we take all those sites and we have to show the site in relation to the project path as well. We can't just list them. So we have to show a figure that shows the project path and then also shows where the site is in relation to it, and then describe that the project is located, half a mile from the archaeological site, or a quarter mile away. So there shouldn't be an issue. So it's really important to identify those sites. And like previously mentioned, if it does come out that there's some you're going to end up going right through, that can become a little bit of an issue, that more work may be needed. And I get into that a little bit further along here. The next step is the threatened and endangered species. So we use a site through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. It's called IPAC, Information for Planning and Consultation. What we do is we go in and import the project path. You can bring in a shapefile or you can trace it in, and then you set how far out you want to search from that project path. And what it does is it pulls a report. I have it here on the next slide. Sample of it. It pulls the report in and it will list threatened and endangered species that are within that range nearby. So that can include, the list usually includes things such as like butterflies, flowers, bees, the Canada lynx this one has. We usually always are gonna see the northern long-eared bat show up. That one seems to be for every project. It'll also list birds, different bird species that are in the area. And again, just like the archaeological sites, once we find that there are species within the project path, we need to justify how the construction of the project is not going to have an effect on those species. Next thing is this site or source, I should say, called it NEPA Assist. This is another spot we go to. There's actually 2 websites that we use that the government set up. And one of the sites gives us the environmental justice information, which was one of those bullet points that was originally listed for the content that goes into an environmental review. Environmental justice information includes stuff such as percentage of people of color in an area, percentage of population below the poverty line, and it shows the project path and then those statistics nearby the project path. The other site gives us all the other information that we need for those other bullet points that the environmental review contains. Step 5, sending consultation letters. This is SHPO and TIPO come into play. Our request for consultation letters are sent to SHPO and to any TIPOs who have an interest in the project area. On average, we're consulting with about 15 to 25 TIPOs per project. Even though there's only 11 federally recognized tribes within the state of Minnesota, some TIPOs that reside outside the state may still have an interest in the project and they need to be consulted. So again, we are oftentimes consulting with a lot more than those 11 tribes. Then once those letters are sent, any TIPO and SHPO, they have 30 days to respond to the consultation letter. If no response is received after 30 days, then the lead agency, which is RUS, can make a determination of no effect on their own. Typically, we always hear back from SHPO. Typically, we don't hear back from TIPOs. Sometimes we do, but it's very rare, but we do have to give them the 30 days to respond. All right, so this is just an example of like a list of tribes. There's different websites that we go to find out which tribes have an interest in the project. So that's where you can see that oftentimes it includes many more tribes that are just in the state of Minnesota. SHPO, so SHPO always responds, like I said, and they may send back a letter requesting that a phase 1A study be completed. They'll either send back a letter saying you're all good to go. There's not going to be any effect on any sites by you doing this project, but they might say, we've seen sites of concern. We think you need to complete a phase 1A study. A phase 1A study is a historical research, environmental context review, and a field inspection. An environmental context review could be like, say there's a body of water nearby. So just having your project be near a body of water could mean that there was a high possibility that at one point tribes were settled there. And then they obviously are going out and doing field inspection as well. From experience in our past, we found that it might be better just to move on and do a phase 2 study instead, even though they're just requesting a phase 1A study. The phase 2 study includes a shovel test. Why we recommend just doing a phase 2 to begin with is because you wait the 30 days, you get the letter back from SHPO, they say, there's the site, an issue. You should do a phase 1A, you take the time, you hire the archaeologists to go out there, do the phase 1A, they come back and SHPO reviews the results. And they look at the phase 1A and they say they can't sign off saying there's no effect, that no more work needs to be done. And they're telling you to go out and get a phase A. At that point, you just wasted money, time, you just delayed the approval process longer. And so it's just easier to do a phase 2 from the get-go, so you're covering all the possibilities, and that way when SHPO reviews the results, they most likely will say you're good to go. If the project area has been previously disturbed, we've found too that sending photos of the project path might also be adequate for SHPO to change the request for a phase 1A study. So we always provide street view photos of a portion of the project path in our project description that we send to SHPO. Usually it's just anytime the project takes a turn down the road at an intersection or something, we take street views showing where the project is going. If there's actually a known site, for example, up north, there's a bunch of lakes that have sites nearby, but if it's a really populated lake and there's like driveway after driveway after driveway, mailbox, if you were to take a little street view photo along there, you could hopefully prove to SHPO that this ground has been previously disturbed, that there should not be an issue. And sometimes that'll prevent them from requesting that phase 1A. Or we did it once with a building that had a parking lot out front, and we're able to just say that, yes, this is a historic building, but there's a parking lot there, and obviously there's public utilities and stuff underground, and we just used the justification that they will bore under that parking lot and provided street view photos so that SHPO could see what we were talking about, and hopefully that can skip the step. So if there's no street views available, which we've all found can be an issue, we might ask that the co-op go out and snap some photos for us of the sites or the project path. So just know that could be a request that we send your way. Next thing is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. When we pull the IPAC report, like I mentioned earlier, the northern long-eared bat always shows up, and sometimes other species like the Canada lynx and the gray wolf. These ones we run into a little bit more of an issue when the project path is within their critical habitat, and you would oftentimes need to consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a form called a 4D streamline form that you have to fill out for the northern long-eared bat always, but the Minnesota Wisconsin Ecological Service field office provided us with a memo, and a memo sent out to the electric utilities confirming that the northern long-eared bat 4D streamline form does not need to be submitted to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service unless tree clearing in the existing right-of-way is greater than 3 inches at breast height diameter. So we're able to just include a copy of this memo when we submit the environmental report, so we don't have to go through the process of filling out that 4D streamline form. But if trees are being trimmed, lone trees are being removed in an existing right of way, or lone trees are being removed along windbreaks, then that 4B form is going to be typo there, going to be filled out. Another example would be if you're doing major tree clearing, like installing a new line and new road right away, and you're right in like the Canada lynx's critical habitat, and you're clearing out trees, very good chance that you could be disrupting their habitat. Then you do need to consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regarding the project. Okay. NRCS. So sometimes for some projects, like substation projects, new substation builds or expansions, this form is going to have to be used. This is called the NRCS form AD 1006. It's a farmland conversion impact rating. We filled this out and submit to them, and they take a look at it and give a rating to the site for it being converted from farmland to its new use. This still needs to be filled out, like even if it's going in undeveloped land in an industrial park. So even if the site's not in farmland, you still need to fill out this form. Next up, we write the report. So send the consultation letters, found the historical and archaeological resources. We've gotten our response back from SHPO and or TIPOs. We need to get the report written. There's 3 different types of reports that we write based on the project type. Minor project code 1600 work orders. The report is typically 2 to 5 pages with a detailed narrative addressing the different aspects of concern in an ER. This report can include more than one code 1600 in the narrative. A 1600 ER would be done for work orders falling under $100,000. The size of the report depends on if the work order would be classified as a .53 project or a .54. A .53 would just be a short, like 2-page summary of the project, just stating the project description and the environmental classification. Very, very brief document. It doesn't go into much detail. If it classifies as a .54 work order, the report gets a little bit longer because we still need to do all the research. We just are not sending off the consultation letters to SHPO and TIPO. If it's a .53 for a work plan or amendment project, it ends up being the same process as the .53 for a 1600. That report is just that brief 2-page summary with the project description and the environmental classification. If it's a .54 project for a work plan or amendment, that report is going to follow the new ER template that RUS has just issued. And this report can get very lengthy, between like 20 and 100 pages, including all the consultation letters, maps, response letters we receive. It gets to be a big report. Here's just kind of a brief snapshot. It's really small and blurry. Sorry, trying to squish it on the slide, but this is kind of the new template that RUS has shared with us, in hopes that if we follow this template, it will speed up the approval process through RUS. And usually starts off with the project description. And then you include things such as the threatened and endangered species that you get back, the SHPO, the TIPO letters, their responses, all the maps that come from those key points that we needed to include. You can kind of see it there, wetlands, floodplains, those environmental justice maps showing like the percentage of people of color. There's water quality maps, important farmland maps, a lot that goes into it that make these full reports very, very large files. After the report is all put together, then we need to go out and get signature from the GM stating that they reviewed the ER and are approving it. Then it can get submitted to RUS finally. 1600s, that style report, they're held at the utility until the work orders are inspected and the 219 form is submitted to RUS. So those, nothing gets done with typically right away unless they are submitted after the work was completed, which is not the way it's supposed to go. The ER report is then reviewed by the engineering department at RUS, which is Ken Solano. That is for the 1600s once they're submitted. Amendments and construction work plan ERs is submitted with the narrative for the amendment and the construction work plan through RD apply. And then the GFR, General Field Representative, will review the ER. If it's a .53, the GFR can approve the amendment or the project at their level. If it's a .54, then the project has to be forwarded to the Environmental Division, EES. And then project approval. This is an example of the form that they fill out. It's a big checklist of things and it gets signed off on. Right now, approvals through RUS are taking approximately 4 to 6 weeks, but that changes all the time. So don't expect that to stay that way. We can't guarantee that. As far as STAR and submitting an environmental report, as you can see, even just with a 30-day waiting period for SHPO and TIPO, it becomes very time consuming. So we say at a minimum 4 to 5 days is very fast turnaround time to get one kicked out. On average, it's probably like 60 to 90 days just because it takes time to prep it, gather all the information, consult with the SHPOs and TIPOs if you run into any issues with having to do archaeological studies that can delay it. So it can be time consuming. I think that's all I got right now. I know some of you are from Iowa and other areas, so just know this is like the Minnesota process. So I know in Iowa with SHPO, the SHPO search, you do need to do the archaeological study for all projects, like right from the get-go. And we recommend that too, if even for Minnesota, if we are doing the SHPO database search and there's sites that you clearly are going to go right through, like a burial site, and there's no way around it. It's a big burial site covering both sides of the road. You just can't get around it. We'll work with you right away, let you know, and just highly suggest that you get that phase 2 study done from the get-go, so that when we reach out to SHPO and consult with them, that we already have proof that that was done and they can just sign off on it. That will speed up hopefully speed up the process a little. But yeah, so you can see a lot of work goes into a lot of consultation, and a lot of time. So let's see, does anyone have any questions?
Feel free to unmute yourself or type your question into the comment box.
I don't see anything popping up. Again, anyone have anything they want to share or any questions? Okay, if not, you can feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is listed there. And I can help answer any questions that you might have. So that was just a very high level overview of what goes into it. So let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, everyone have a good day. Thank you.